I accidentally found my late husband's old bank account. There was $93 million in it. He always said we were poor, and his salary was $700 a month. When I called the bank, the manager said 3 words he just called. My name is Abigail, 33 years old, and I stood in the pouring rain outside my own home, completely shattered. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had your world turned upside down by the very people who promised to protect you. I had just returned from the cemetery. We buried an empty casket for my husband David. Authorities stated the factory fire was so intense his remains were unidentifiable. My eyes were swollen, my black dress soaked from the drizzle. My grief was interrupted the second I stepped onto the porch of the house David and I rented from his parents. 6 heavy black trash bags were piled against the front door. My entire life stuffed into garbage bags like worthless debris. Before I could process the sight, the front door swung open. My mother-in-law, Patricia, stood there, her face a mask of cold contempt. She did not offer a comforting hug or condolences. Instead, she flicked a crisp piece of paper at my face. It fluttered to the wet porch planks. I stared down at a check for $5,000. David's life insurance pays out $50,000. Patricia stated, her voice as icy as the rain. The family is keeping the rest for his proper memorial and our emotional distress. Take this $5,000 and get off our property by tonight. We own this house and you are no longer a tenant. David is dead. My family has no obligation to keep funding a freeloader like you. Funding me. Funding me, I gasped. I paid the rent every single month with my own money. A sharp tug on my neck cut off my words. My sister-in-law Rebecca shoved past her mother and violently yanked the silver wedding necklace off my collarbone. The delicate chain snapped, leaving a red welt across my skin. Rebecca, wearing a designer trench coat, sneered at me. You do not deserve to wear our family heirlooms, Rebecca spat, clutching the broken necklace. You are a gullible charity case who brought my brother terrible luck. Do not act like you contributed to his life. We all know you spent the last 5 years ruining your hands in the dirt at that pathetic plant nursery, working 3 grueling shifts a day to cover his student debt. You actually believed he was only making $700 a month. You were just a convenient workhorse. Now that he is gone, we are done looking at your pitiful face. The cruelty was so absolute I could not even formulate a response. Patricia stepped forward and kicked a pile of debris off the welcome mat. It was David's old winter coat, the one he wore when we first started dating. She kicked it straight into the muddy puddle at my feet. Take your trash and leave before I call security to have you escorted out like the trespasser you are. Patricia snapped before slamming the heavy oak door right in my face. The deadbolt clicked loudly, locking me out. The rain poured down harder, chilling my bones. I dropped to my knees in the mud, my hands shaking as I reached for David's ruined coat. Gripping the familiar fabric, something stiff and unnatural caught my attention. A solid lump was sewn deep inside the inner lining of the chest pocket. My heart pounded against my ribs. David never let me wash this coat. He always insisted on taking it to a specialty cleaner across town. With freezing fingers, I tore at the wet seam. The fabric gave way, revealing a small waterproof plastic pouch. Inside was a heavy, intricately carved safety deposit key and a laminated card bearing a routing number for a highly exclusive private bank in Geneva, Switzerland. I sat in the mud, the cold rain washing over me, staring at the foreign bank details. David always claimed we were drowning in debt. He scrutinized every grocery receipt. He made me feel guilty for buying new work boots for my floral business. Why did a man who supposedly earned $700 a month possess a private Swiss banking credential hidden inside the lining of a winter coat? A chilling sense of dread replaced my sorrow. I pulled my phone from my pocket, shielding the screen from the rain with my hand. I dialed the international number listed on the card. After a series of automated prompts, a human voice answered, speaking with a crisp, professional European accent. I gave them the routing number and the account identification code. I am calling to report the death of the account holder David. I said, my voice cracking over his name. I am his legal wife and widow. I need to begin the process of freezing the assets and closing the account due to his tragic passing in a fire 3 days ago. The loud sound of keyboard typing echoed over the line, followed by a sudden heavy silence. The ambient static of the international call seemed to stretch on for an eternity. Madam, the bank manager finally replied. His previously composed voice now trembled with unmistakable alarm. I do not know what kind of fraudulent claim you are attempting to make today, but I assure you the account holder is very much alive. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. What are you talking about? I just buried him. The authorities confirmed he died in the factory fire. The manager paused again, taking a very sharp breath, before uttering 3 words that stopped my heart completely and set my entire reality ablaze. He literally just called. The bank manager's words echoed in my ear, impossible. My name is Al, 33 years old. As I stood freezing in the rain outside the house, I was evicted from rage, burned away my grief. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had your world turned upside down by people who promised to protect you. I hung up and slammed the gas. I drove to the downtown branch of that private Swiss bank, leaving muddy tire tracks on the pristine marble floor. I bypassed the receptionist, marching directly to the senior account manager's desk. I slammed my marriage certificate, the death certificate, and the laminated routing card onto his desk. I demanded full access to my late husband's ledger right now, asserting my widow rights. The manager tried protesting, stammering about privacy protocols. I leaned over his desk, my face inches from his. I told him to open the ledger or I would have my lawyers audit every transaction flowing through his branch by morning. He swallowed hard, his fingers trembling as he typed the routing code into his secure terminal. He clicked a button and turned the monitor. I stared at the glowing screen. The numbers sharpened. The balance read $93,450,000. My husband, the man who scrutinized my grocery bills, who made me work 18-hour days at the plant nursery, who swore his office job only paid $700 a month, was sitting on an empire. He watched me struggle while hoarding a literal fortune. I spun around and walked out. I knew exactly where my in-laws were. Rebecca posted a public update tagging the most expensive steakhouse in the city. They were celebrating his death using the life insurance payout they just stole. I drove to the steakhouse and shoved past the host. The dining room was dimly lit, filled with wealthy patrons. I spotted them immediately in a velvet booth. Patricia, Richard, and Rebecca were laughing, clinking crystal glasses of imported champagne. Sitting quietly at the edge was Jamal, Rebecca's husband. Jamal was a brilliant African-American veterinary doctor, and the only person in that family who treated me with human decency. I marched up to their table and slammed my hands onto the white tablecloth. "Having a nice celebration with my insurance money?" I asked, my voice slicing through the jazz music. Patricia gasped, clutching her pearl necklace. She demanded to know how I got past security ordering me away before I ruined their appetite. I ignored her and looked directly at Richard. I went to the private bank. I saw the ledger. $93 million. Did you know your son was a multimillionaire while you let him pretend to be a struggling clerk? Or are you in on the scam? The color drained from Rebecca's face. Patricia choked on her champagne. Richard did not miss a beat. He stood up, towering over the table, switching into a theatrical performance. "Somebody call an ambulance for my poor daughter-in-law," Richard shouted, projecting his voice so the entire restaurant could hear. He begged everyone to forgive me, claiming I lost my husband in a terrible fire, and grief had shattered my mind. He claimed I was hallucinating millions of dollars that did not exist. I stepped closer, warning him not to gaslight me. Richard slammed his fist on the table and turned to Jamal. He ordered Jamal to use his medical credentials to call the psychiatric ward right now and sign a 72-hour involuntary hold on me. "Lock her up before she embarrasses this family any further," Richard commanded. The restaurant fell dead silent. Patricia and Rebecca stared expectantly at Jamal. Jamal slowly wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. He looked at his wife, then at his father-in-law. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a silver pen. Richard smirked, thinking he had won. Instead of making a phone call, Jamal slammed the heavy pen down onto his porcelain dinner plate, shattering it into pieces. No, Jamal said, his deep voice carrying incredible authority. I am not signing anything. I am a veterinarian, Richard, not your personal attack dog. I am done covering for this toxic family. Rebecca grabbed his arm, telling him to stop making a scene. Jamal laughed bitterly, shaking off her grip. He exposed how she secretly maxed out 4 of his business credit cards that morning to buy designer shoes. He announced he was filing for divorce and leaving right now. Jamal stood up. Richard threatened to ruin his veterinary clinic by Monday. Jamal did not flinch. He walked deliberately past Richard. As he approached me, he feigned a slight stumble, bumping his shoulder against mine. I felt his hand slip a folded piece of glossy paper deep into my pocket. Check it when you are safe, Jamal whispered faintly. Give them hell, Abigail. Jamal walked out of the steakhouse, leaving my in-laws fuming. Richard signaled the restaurant bouncers to approach. I backed away from the table, maintaining eye contact with the people who tortured me for 5 years, and walked out into the cold night air. I reached my van, locked the doors, and pulled the folded paper from my pocket. It was a printed photograph. I turned on the dome light to examine it. My breath left my body. It was a picture of my dead husband, David. He was wearing a tailored suit, looking wealthier than I had ever seen him. He was standing outside a luxury car dealership, kissing a glamorous blonde woman named Fiona. The digital timestamp printed in the bottom corner indicated exactly when Jamal snapped the picture. It was taken 3 days after the factory fire, 3 days after David supposedly burned to death. How was alive? I stared at the glossy photograph in the dim light of my van, my breath catching. My supposedly dead husband was wrapping his arms around a glamorous blonde woman outside a luxury dealership. The timestamp glared at me in stark white numbers. 72 hours after the factory exploded. There were no tears left in me. The crushing grief that had suffocated me all morning evaporated, replaced by a white-hot rage. 5 years of calloused hands, double shifts, and counting pennies for a man who was playing me for a fool. I picked up my phone and dialed the international number for the private Swiss bank. The same manager answered, his tone cautious. I gave him my account identification code. I am the legal widow of the primary account holder. I stated, my voice echoing like steel inside the van. I am invoking my spousal rights and filing a formal fraud dispute. Freeze every single asset connected to this routing number immediately. The manager hesitated, mentioning international banking protocol and verification delays. I cut him off sharply. I have visual proof of identity fraud and massive money laundering. Freeze the $93 million right now, or I will hand this routing number directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and watch them raid your local affiliate branch. Keyboard keys clattered rapidly over the speaker. A heavy click sounded. The funds are locked, Adam, the manager replied, his voice tense. No outgoing transfers can be authorized under any circumstances. I hung up the phone. A global financial lockdown was now in effect. David was cut off from his empire. I drove straight to my floral shop. I needed to gather my business ledgers to ensure David had not tied my shop to his phantom empire to launder his cash. I unlocked the front door, the brass bell chiming above. The scent of damp earth and blooming orchids usually calmed my nerves. Today it was just a backdrop for war. I barely had time to boot up my computer in the back office when the front bell chimed again, followed by the violent crash of the heavy glass door slamming against the interior wall. Patricia and Rebecca stormed into my shop. They were out of breath, clutching designer shopping bags, their faces twisted in absolute fury. Rebecca marched straight up to the checkout counter and slammed a sleek platinum credit card onto the glass display case, cracking the surface. Fix it! Rebecca shrieked, her voice shrill enough to rattle the windows. My card just declined at the boutique for a $5,000 handbag. The cashier looked at me like I was a common criminal. Fix whatever you did to our accounts right now, you worthless florist. I looked at the declined platinum card, then up at my sister-in-law, feeling a dark satisfaction. Your accounts? I asked, calmly, stepping out from the back office. You mean David's hidden accounts, the ones he funded while I worked myself to the bone paying your rent and his fake student loans. Patricia lunged forward and grabbed a rare imported blue orchid from the main counter display. I had spent 6 months cultivating it. It was worth $800. She threw it directly onto the hardwood floor. The ceramic pot shattered, instantly scattering wet soil and crushed petals across the room. "You ungrateful brat!" Patricia screamed, pointing a manicured finger right at my face. "My son left us that money to maintain our lifestyle. He knew you would just squander it on dirt and weeds. Call the bank and lift the restriction before I tear this entire pathetic shop apart." Rebecca grabbed a heavy glass terrarium from a lower shelf, raising it above her head. She hurled it into the display wall behind me. Glass rained down in jagged shards, destroying dozens of delicate arrangements and soaking the floor with water. "Do what my mother says," Rebecca yelled, kicking a pile of broken glass toward me. "You are nothing but a temporary mistake David made. We are his real family." I did not scream. I did not flinch. I watched them destroy my hard work with cold, unblinking calculation. They thought I was still the obedient, exhausted wife they could bully into submission. They were wrong. I reached under the checkout counter. My fingers found the heavy red master switch for the shop's security system. I pressed it down firmly. A loud mechanical grinding noise echoed through the shop. Solid steel security shutters dropped rapidly over the front windows, and the main door slamming into the floor and locking automatically. The shop plunged into dim artificial light. Patricia and Rebecca froze, looking at the impenetrable steel barriers trapping them inside. "Open those doors right now," Patricia demanded, marching toward the counter with her fists clenched. I picked up the telephone and dialed emergency services. "Yes, I need the police immediately," I said, clearly maintaining unbroken eye contact with my mother-in-law. "I have 2 intruders trapped inside my store. They are committing felony destruction of commercial property. Please send a squad car right away." I hung up the phone. Rebecca grabbed the edge of the counter, her arrogant facade completely cracking. "You cannot do this," she panicked, her eyes darting around the steel walls. "I have a social event tonight. I cannot be arrested. My friends will see it on the police scanner." I ignored her whining entirely. I pulled out a blank invoice pad and a pen. I walked around the counter, my boots crunching over the shattered glass and ruined soil. I started tallying up the damages meticulously. Blue orchid, $800. Glass terrariums, $2,000. Broken custom shelving, structural damage, loss of inventory. I ripped the invoice off the pad and shoved it hard against Patricia's chest. $20,000 in damages, I stated flatly. "And since your platinum cards are currently frozen by a Swiss bank fraud department, I am guessing you cannot pay for this. Enjoy explaining to the police why you are destroying private property while completely broke." Patricia opened her mouth to scream, but flashing police lights bled through the small cracks in the steel shutters. Someone banged heavily on the metal front door. "Police, open up." I hit the master switch again. The steel shutters slowly rolled upward, revealing 2 uniformed officers standing on the sidewalk. They stepped inside, assessing the shattered glass, ruined flowers, and the 2 wealthy women standing in the mess, looking absolutely terrified. "Are these the individuals destroying your property?" the taller officer asked me, his hand resting on his radio belt. "Yes," I replied without hesitation. "I want to press full felony charges against both of them." Patricia started screaming wildly, playing the victim. She tried to tell the officers I was her crazy daughter-in-law, holding them hostage, crying fake tears to gain sympathy. The officers ignored her theatrics completely. They grabbed Patricia by the arms, spun her around, and secured cold steel handcuffs tightly around her wrists. Rebecca shrieked, backing away into a shelf, but the second officer quickly detained her, cuffing her hands behind her back. As Patricia was being roughly patted down by the officer, her designer handbag slipped from her shoulder. It spilled open onto the wet floor. Her smartphone tumbled out, landing face up right next to a pile of shattered glass. The screen illuminated brightly in the dim shop. A text message notification popped up from an unsaved international number. I stepped closer and looked down at the glowing screen. The message read clearly, "Mom, my Swiss transfer blocked. I cannot buy the flight to Zurich with Fiona. Did the florist do something?" I snatched the phone off the floor and read the words again, my pulse hammering wildly. I snatched the phone and read the words. David was trying to flee to Zurich. The transfer was blocked. I had paralyzed a multi-million-dollar ghost. Handing the phone to the arresting officer, I filed my statement against Patricia and Rebecca. As the squad car drove away with my in-laws handcuffed in the back, I locked the steel shutters of my ruined floral shop. I drove my van to a cheap motel to plan my next move. I paid for 3 nights in cash. The room smelled of smoke, but the deadbolt offered sanctuary. I sat on the sagging mattress and stared at the photograph Jamal had secretly given me. David was alive. My husband faked his death, allowed his greedy family to evict me into the rain, and planned to vanish to Switzerland with $93 million and a wealthy blonde mistress. I ruined my hands digging into freezing soil during brutal night shifts to pay for groceries he claimed we could not afford. The rage boiling inside me burned brighter than the factory fire that supposedly claimed his life. A sharp knock snapped me out of my thoughts. I checked the peephole. It was Richard. My father-in-law stood under the flickering neon light holding a sleek silver briefcase. He wore a tailored suit and an unsettling, compassionate smile. I opened the door just a few inches, keeping the security chain engaged. "Let me in," Abigail Richards said, his voice dripping with fake empathy. "I come in peace. I just paid bail for my wife and daughter. I want to make things right." I stared at him. "You want to make things right?" I asked coldly. "Your wife threw my clothes into garbage bags. Your daughter ripped my wedding necklace off my throat. And your dead son is trying to book a flight to Zurich." Richard did not flinch. He patted the briefcase. "I know everything," he replied softly. "Let me inside. I have something right here that will solve all your problems forever." I unlatched the chain and stepped back. Richard walked into the dingy room looking out of place. He set the heavy briefcase onto the table and clicked the latches open. Stacks of crisp $100 bills filled the velvet interior. $100,000 in untraceable cash. Richard turned to me, playing the caring father figure with sickening perfection. "I always knew David was an absolute fool for making you work those grueling night shifts at the plant nursery," he said. "You gave up your 20s to support a man who never appreciated your sacrifice. You have suffered enough, Abigail. Take the cash. You can start a completely new life. Buy a new floral shop. Travel the world. Just leave this toxic family behind you and find your peace." I looked at the cash, then up at Richard. "And what is the exact catch?" I asked. Richard reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document along with a fountain pen. He smoothed the paper onto the table. "No catch at all," he promised. "Just a standard severance agreement. It states that you accept this cash as a final divorce settlement and officially waive any legal rights to David's remaining estate. Sign it, take the money, and we will never bother you again." I walked over and picked up the contract. I scanned straight down to the fine print at the bottom of the second page. There it was, buried under layers of dense legal jargon. By signing this document, the spouse explicitly relinquishes all claims and administrative holds regarding any international financial account, specifically including private banking institutions located in Geneva. I let out a harsh laugh. "You really think I am that stupid?" I said, looking Richard directly in the eye. "You are offering me $100,000 to release a freeze on $93 million. This is not a severance agreement. This is a ransom note for your son's stolen empire." Richard dropped the caring father act instantly. His face hardened into a mask of pure malice. "Listen to me, you ignorant florist," he hissed. "You are playing a dangerous game with people who can easily crush you. Take the cash and sign the paper. If you refuse, you will walk away with absolutely nothing. We will drag this out in court until you are bankrupt and living on the streets." I walked over to my duffel bag and pulled out the portable document shredder I retrieved from my shop's back office. I plugged it into the wall outlet. I grabbed Richard's meticulously drafted contract, turned the machine on, and fed the thick paper straight into the grinding metal teeth. Richard lunged forward, but it was too late. The document turned into a pile of illegible confetti. I grabbed the silver briefcase, hauled it off the table, and threw it forcefully out the open motel door. The briefcase hit the concrete walkway, spilling bills into the cold night wind. "Get out of my room," I commanded. "Tell your son his money stays frozen until I say otherwise." Richard glared at me. "You are signing your own death warrant," he snarled before marching out the door, scrambling to gather his scattered cash from the wet pavement. I slammed the door and locked the deadbolt. Hours passed. Around 2 in the morning, a violent crash jolted me awake. The motel window shattered. A heavy red brick rolled across the floor. I jumped up. The cold night air poured into the room. A piece of parchment paper was tightly wrapped around the brick, secured by a rubber band, holding a silver metal lighter. I pulled the paper free and unfolded it under the bathroom light. The message was written in bold, frantic handwriting. It read, "Unfreeze the accounts by tomorrow, or you will burn alive just like the homeless man we used as David's body double." I stared at the threatening note wrapped around the brick. "Unfreeze the accounts by tomorrow, or you will burn alive, just like the homeless man we used as David's body double." The words burned into my mind. I did not panic. I picked up my phone and sent a secure message to Jamal. We met at dawn in the dusty parking lot of a 24-hour diner. Jamal looked exhausted, but resolute. He had spent the night changing the locks on his house and serving Rebecca her eviction papers. I handed him the note and the lighter. Jamal read the chilling threat, his jaw clenching tight. He pulled out his laptop and connected to the motel manager's secure network. Jamal knew the manager from treating his guard dogs for years. Within minutes, he bypassed the firewall and pulled up the security camera footage from the alleyway behind my room. We watched the black and white video closely. A sleek silver sports car rolled into the frame at exactly 2 a.m. The driver's side door opened. It was not Richard or David. A tall woman with long blonde hair stepped out wearing designer heels. She casually hurled the brick through my window, took a photo of the shattered glass with her phone, and drove away. "It is Fiona," Jamal said, zooming in on her arrogant face. "She is the daughter of a notorious commercial real estate tycoon in the city. Her father practically owns the zoning board and the local police precincts. They are ruthless." I memorized the license plate number on the silver sports car. I told Jamal to run the plates through his databases while I went to secure my next move. I left the diner and walked 2 blocks to a quiet corner coffee shop to gather my thoughts. I ordered a black coffee and sat in a booth facing the door. I barely took my first sip when the bell above the entrance chimed. Fiona walked in. She wore a pristine white coat that probably cost more than my entire floral shop inventory. 2 massive men in dark suits followed closely behind her, standing like stone statues by the doorway. Fiona spotted me instantly. She marched over to my booth and slid into the seat across from me without asking. She reeked of expensive perfume and absolute entitlement. "You are much plainer in person," Fiona sneered, looking me up and down with sheer disgust. "I do not understand how David tolerated living in your cheap rental house for 5 years." I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap. "How did you find me?" I asked, keeping my voice low and trembling slightly to make her feel powerful. Fiona laughed, a sharp and grating sound. "My father owns half the security cameras on this block. You cannot hide from us, Abigail. You were never meant to be a permanent fixture in David's life. You were just a convenient poverty cover. An invisible, hardworking florist makes the perfect shield to avoid federal tax audits, while David built his real empire offshore. You served your purpose. Now you are a liability." She snapped her fingers. One of her bodyguards approached and dropped a thick manila envelope onto the table. Fiona pushed it toward me. "There is a cashier check for $1 million in there," Fiona stated proudly. "Take it. Go buy yourself a nice little greenhouse in the suburbs. Drop the freeze on the Swiss accounts right now, sign the divorce papers, and walk away from my fiancé." "Your fiancé?" I asked, letting my voice crack perfectly. "You are marrying a man who is legally dead." Fiona leaned forward, resting her diamond-covered hands on the table. "He is only dead on paper. Once the offshore money is transferred to my father's holding accounts, David gets a new name and a new face. We will be sipping champagne in Zurich by the weekend. Do not be stupid, Abigail. Take the $1 million. If you refuse, my father will make sure you end up exactly like the poor soul rotting in David's grave." I shrunk back against the booth, widening my eyes to feign absolute terror. "You killed a man," I whispered in horror. "You murdered an innocent person just to fake a death." Fiona rolled her eyes, annoyed by my apparent weakness. "Do not be so dramatic. He was a homeless addict. Nobody even noticed he went missing. David found him sleeping behind the factory. We drugged him, swapped his clothes with David's, and let the fire do the rest. My father's fixers easily bribed the county coroner to sign off on the dental records. The medical examiner got a brand new boat, and we got a flawless death certificate. It was ridiculously easy. Money buys every single truth in this city. You bribed a public official to cover up a murder. I repeated slowly, ensuring my diction was incredibly clear. Fiona smirked, completely blinded by her own arrogance. We did. And we will gladly pay the same coroner to sign your death certificate if you do not lift that bank freeze by noon today. You have 4 hours, Abigail. Make the smart choice. Fiona stood up, adjusted her pristine white coat, and signaled her guards. She walked out of the coffee shop, leaving the envelope on the table. She thought she had completely broken me. She had no idea that the zipper on my leather purse was slightly open. Tucked securely inside was a high-definition digital recorder capturing every single word of her arrogant, detailed confession. I left the $1 million check on the table. I grabbed my purse and walked out the back exit, my heart pounding with triumphant adrenaline. I had the murder confession. I had the bribery confession. The entire syndicate was falling right into my hands. My phone vibrated violently in my pocket. I answered it immediately. It was Jamal. I was breathing heavily, his voice frantic and laced with absolute panic. Abigail, you need to listen to me right now. Jamal gasped over the line. I ran the license plate from the silver sports car Fiona was driving. I hacked into the state registry to see who actually owns the vehicle. Did you find her father's holding company? I asked, walking quickly toward my van. No, Jamal shouted, panic rising in his chest. That is the problem. The shell company that owns Fiona's car, the one tied to the offshore accounts and the bribery payments. It is legally registered under the exact tax identification number of my veterinary clinic. I froze in the middle of the sidewalk. They are not just trying to kill you, Jamal said, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. Richard and David stole my business identity. They are framing me for the entire financial fraud and the murder. I took a deep breath, realizing the war had only just begun. I told Jamal to lock down his clinic servers immediately and meet me at my motel room. When he arrived, he was visibly shaking with rage. We opened his laptop and pulled up his business banking dashboard. Rebecca had administrative access to his corporate accounts. We watched in real time as pending transactions popped up on the screen. She was attempting to initiate a mass wire transfer to drain his entire life savings and operational funds into an offshore account. They were planning to steal his money, frame him for their federal crimes, and flee the country, leaving him to take the fall for the financial fraud. Jamal slammed his fist on the table and hit the emergency freeze button on his own accounts, blocking the transfers just seconds before they cleared. The red error message flashed across his screen, securing his life savings. We need the master ledgers, Jamal said, his voice deadly calm. Richard keeps a secure server in his home office. It holds every single transaction, every shell company, every bribe. If we get that drive, we prove they framed me and faked David's death. I looked at him and formulated a plan. You invite them to dinner, I said. Jamal sent Rebecca a message begging for a reconciliation. He invited Richard, Patricia, and Rebecca to his house for a lavish forgiveness dinner. He promised to sign whatever financial documents they needed, playing the role of the broken, submissive husband they always believed him to be. The greedy family took the bait, immediately eager to finalize their theft. By 7 o'clock that evening, Jamal texted me a confirmation. They were all sitting at his dining room table, drinking his expensive wine, completely oblivious. That was my cue. I parked my van 2 blocks away from Richard and Patricia's massive suburban estate. Jamal had given me his spare key code for their back door. I slipped through the shadows of the manicured lawn, punched the digits into the keypad, and stepped inside the empty mansion. The house was silent, filled with expensive art bought with stolen money. I moved quickly upstairs to Richard's private office. The heavy oak door was unlocked. I sat at his massive mahogany desk and woke up the computer. Jamal had memorized Richard's master password months ago when he set up the family's wireless network. I typed it in, holding my breath, praying the password had not been changed. The screen unlocked instantly. I plugged in my high-capacity flash drive and began copying the encrypted financial ledgers, watching the progress bar slowly inch forward. Miles away, Jamal was executing his part of the mission flawlessly. He served a gourmet meal while his in-laws treated him like absolute garbage. Rebecca scoffed at the food, swirling her wine glass with utter disdain. She looked at her husband and laughed, her voice dripping with venom. "You should be grateful we even let you sit at the same table as us," Rebecca sneered. "You are just a pathetic animal doctor. My family is building a global enterprise. We needed your clinic's tax identification to process some minor investments. Stop crying about it and sign the asset transfer document so we can leave. Your heritage is exactly why you will never understand real wealth. You should be thanking us for elevating your status in society." Jamal did not raise his voice. He did not show an ounce of the fury burning inside his chest. He calmly picked up his linen napkin, wiped his mouth, and stood up from the head of the table. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a thick legal folder. He tossed it directly onto Rebecca's plate, right on top of her half-eaten steak. "What is this garbage?" she demanded, glaring at the paperwork. Jamal smiled a cold and calculated expression. "Those are divorce papers," Jamal stated clearly. "And tucked right behind them is a 24-hour eviction notice. This house is my premarital asset, legally protected under the prenup you thought you outsmarted. You have until tomorrow night to pack your bags and get off my property." Richard stood up, his face turning purple with rage, threatening to destroy Jamal's career and ruin him financially. Jamal simply laughed in his father-in-law's face. "You cannot destroy anything, Richard. By the way, Rebecca, I also canceled your premium health insurance at noon today. Good luck paying for your luxury treatments with frozen bank accounts." "I want you out of my sight and out of my life," Jamal commanded, turning his back on them. Back at the mansion, the progress bar on the computer screen finally hit 100%. The massive download was complete. I ripped the flash drive from the port and shoved it deep into my jacket pocket. I wiped down the desk, making sure I left no trace of my presence, and hurried down the back staircase. I slipped out the rear door, locking it securely behind me, and sprinted across the dark lawn. The cold night air whipped against my face as I ran down the quiet, tree-lined street toward my parked van. I was completely alone on the sidewalk. I had the undeniable evidence. We had finally won. Suddenly, blinding halogen headlights pierced the darkness. A massive black SUV roared down the street, accelerating at a terrifying speed, without any lights on until the very last second. The heavy engine roared loudly as the vehicle violently jumped the concrete curb, completely blocking my path and pinning me against a tall brick wall. I froze, my heart hammering in my throat as tire smoke filled the air. The driver's side door swung open heavily. Heavy boots stepped onto the pavement. A tall man walked out of the shadows, slamming the heavy car door shut behind him, and stood directly in the harsh glow of the street lamp. The man I had just buried. It was David. He did not look like a ghost. He looked like a predator who had finally cornered his prey. Before I could process the shock of seeing my dead husband breathing the cold night air, David lunged forward. His heavy hands slammed into my shoulders, shoving me violently backward. My spine hit the rough brick wall of the alleyway with a sickening thud, knocking the breath from my lungs. The flash drive in my pocket dug sharply into my hip, a silent reminder of the power I held. "Abby, you need to listen to me right now," David hissed, pinning me against the cold masonry. He looked around frantically, his eyes wide with manufactured panic. "I did it for us. You have to believe me. I had to fake my death to escape the mob. They were going to kill us both. The factory fire was the only way out. Unfreeze the money tonight, Abby. Just make the call and we can run away together. We can finally have the life I always promised you." He stared down at me, deploying the exact same manipulative, pleading expression he used for 5 years whenever he gambled away our rent money or forced me to pick up a third shift at the plant nursery. He expected me to dissolve into tears, to wrap my arms around him and thank him for protecting me. He expected the exhausted, compliant wife who believed his pathetic lies about a $700 monthly salary. I did not cry. I did not melt into his arms. I felt a surge of absolute clarity, a sharp, white-hot rage that eradicated any lingering trace of the woman I used to be. I pulled my right arm back and slapped him across the face with every ounce of strength I possessed. The sound cracked through the empty street like a gunshot. The force of the blow snapped his head sideways. He stumbled back, his hands dropping from my shoulders. A bright bead of crimson blood welled up at the corner of his mouth, trailing down his chin. "You did it for us!" I shouted, my voice echoing off the brick walls. You let your mother throw me into the freezing rain on the day of your funeral. You let your sister rip my wedding necklace off my throat and kick me into the mud. I ruined my hands in the dirt for 5 years. I worked myself to the bone while you sat on $93 million. You let your family treat me like garbage while you bought sports cars with the daughter of a real estate tycoon. Do not you dare tell me you did this for us. David wiped the blood from his lip, his facade of the protective husband shattering completely. His eyes narrowed, filled with a cold, calculating malice I had never seen before. He took a threatening step forward, cornering me again. You are playing a very dangerous game with money you do not understand, Abigail. I have people who can make you disappear permanently. You froze my accounts. You ruined my flight to Zurich. Now you are going to fix it, or I will not be able to hold them back anymore. I stared into his dark eyes, realizing exactly how desperate he was. He was trapped. He could not access a single dime of his offshore empire without my biometric authorization and legal consent as his widow. He needed me alive just long enough to sign the banking release. I knew I could not overpower him physically in this dark alley. I needed to outsmart him. I needed to feed his massive ego and make him believe he still controlled me. I let my shoulders slump. I forced my breathing to become shallow and ragged. I looked down at the pavement, blinking rapidly to force hot tears to well up in my eyes. I let out a broken, pathetic sob, channeling every ounce of acting ability I had. I was just so scared, David, I cried, my voice shaking perfectly. I thought I lost you. Your mother was so cruel to me. Fiona came to me and threatened my life. I did not know what to do. I froze the accounts because I was terrified and angry. I just wanted my husband back. David relaxed immediately. The tension left his shoulders. His massive ego eagerly swallowed the performance. He stepped closer, wrapping his arms around me, pulling me into a suffocating embrace. Shh, it is okay, Abby. I am here now. You are safe. Just unfreeze the money and we will leave all of this behind. I pressed my face against his expensive cashmere coat, pretending to seek comfort. As I hugged him, my fingers slipped into my jacket pocket. I pulled out a tiny magnetic GPS tracker Jamal had given me earlier that day. With swift, silent precision, I slid the tracker deep into the outer pocket of David's coat. I will do it, I whispered against his chest, pulling away and wiping my fake tears. I will sign the unfreeze authorization on the bank's digital tablet. But I have one condition. You have to prove to me that I am the one you are choosing, not your family and not Fiona. Name it, David said eagerly, wiping a stray tear from my cheek. Tomorrow night is Fiona's high society charity gala at the downtown Grand Hotel, I said, looking him directly in the eye. I know you will be there. Bring the bank tablet to the VIP room. I will sign the release. But your parents, your sister, and Fiona all have to be in that room. I want them to look me in the eye and apologize for everything they have done to me. I want them to admit that I am your legal wife and the one holding the power. Once they apologize, I will sign the money over, and we can leave together. David smiled, a slow, greedy grin spreading across his face. He thought my demand was just the petty revenge of an insecure, jealous wife. He had no idea he was walking straight into a federal trap. You have my word, Abby, David promised smoothly. Tomorrow night at the gala, everyone will be there to apologize. I will have the tablet ready. We will finish this. He leaned down and pressed a gentle, lingering kiss to my forehead, playing the loving husband one last time. He turned and walked back toward his massive black SUV, his boots crunching on the pavement. I stayed pinned against the brick wall, watching him retreat into the shadows. As David reached his vehicle, he stopped. Believing he was safely out of earshot, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a cheap burner phone. He dialed a number, his voice dropping to a harsh, commanding whisper that carried perfectly through the silent night air. She bought it, David said into the phone, his tone dripping with absolute contempt. She is coming to the gala tomorrow night to sign the digital release. Have the team ready in the VIP room. Once she signs the authorization and the funds clear, inject her with the fentanyl. Make it look like an overdose, a tragic suicide of a grieving widow. I want her gone the second the money hits my account. He ended the call, tossed the burner phone onto the passenger seat, and climbed into the SUV. The engine roared to life, and the vehicle sped away into the night, leaving me alone on the dark street. I stood perfectly still as the red taillights disappeared around the corner. I reached into my pocket and gripped the flash drive containing the money laundering ledgers. My pulse hammered with a fierce, triumphant rhythm. David thought he had orchestrated the perfect murder. He had no idea I heard every single word. And he certainly did not know about the GPS tracker currently broadcasting his exact location directly to my phone. The final stage was set. I turned and walked quickly toward my van. I walked toward my van, ready to deliver my dead husband straight to the federal authorities. I drove directly to the federal building downtown. Jamal was waiting on the grand concrete steps, clutching his leather satchel tight against his chest. We walked through the security metal detectors side by side. I demanded an emergency meeting with the Financial Crimes Division. The desk officer tried to dismiss us until I slammed the flash drive onto the counter and played a 10-second audio clip of Fiona confessing to bribing the county medical examiner to cover up a murder. Within 2 minutes, we were sitting inside a heavily secured interrogation room. A senior federal agent walked in, introduced himself as Special Agent Mitchell, and plugged the flash drive into an isolated terminal. His eyes widened as the decrypted ledgers loaded onto the wall monitor. The sheer magnitude of the financial crimes flashed in bright blue numbers across the screen. David and Richard were not just hiding money from the tax authorities. They were operating a massive, sophisticated laundering syndicate directly tied to the commercial real estate empire owned by Fiona's father. They were cleaning illegal funds through fraudulent property developments and framing Jamal's veterinary clinic as the primary shell company. "You handed us the key to dismantle the biggest organized crime syndicate in this state," Agent Mitchell said, his voice laced with absolute disbelief. "But we have a critical problem. The $93 million is sitting in a holding state because of your freeze. If David forces you to authorize the release before we can physically secure the servers, that money will instantly scatter into untraceable cryptocurrency wallets across the globe. We will lose the physical asset trail tying Fiona's father to the murders." I crossed my arms, looking Agent Mitchell dead in the eye. "That will not happen. I am meeting David tomorrow night at Fiona's High Society charity gala. He expects me to sign the biometric release on a bank tablet in the VIP room. He also ordered a lethal dose of fentanyl to stage my suicide the second the transfer clears." The federal agent stared at me, completely stunned by my absolute calm. I was not the terrified florist David thought he could easily manipulate. I was the architect of his impending destruction. Agent Mitchell quickly assembled a tactical response team. They agreed to sting the charity gala, but they needed an inside perspective. They wired me with a microscopic high-definition camera and a military-grade microphone perfectly concealed inside a glittering diamond brooch. "Listen to me very carefully, Abigail," Agent Mitchell warned, pinning the diamond brooch to my collar. "You are walking into a confined space with desperate people who intend to murder you. We will have elite tactical units surrounding the building and agents posing as catering staff inside the ballroom. But we cannot breach the VIP room until we capture David explicitly confessing his intent to launder the funds and execute the transfer on camera. You have to stall them, play their game. Do not let him hit the transfer button until we secure the perimeter or the money vanishes forever." I nodded, touching the cold diamond brooch. "I will give you your confession. Just be ready to kick the doors down." The following evening, the downtown Grand Hotel was completely illuminated by flashing camera bulbs and luxury spotlights. The charity gala was an ultra-exclusive event designed to showcase the immense wealth and fake philanthropy of Fiona's father. I stepped out of the black town car the federal agents provided, placing my stiletto heel onto the red carpet. I was not wearing my soil-stained work boots or my faded jeans. I wore a jaw-dropping floor-length crimson silk gown that hugged every curve perfectly. My hair was styled in sleek dark waves cascading down my back, and the diamond wires sparkled fiercely under the camera flashes. I commanded the space the second my foot hit the pavement. As I walked up the grand staircase toward the ballroom entrance, I spotted two very familiar faces arguing with the front door security guards. Patricia and Rebecca were throwing a massive, humiliating tantrum outside the velvet ropes. Their frozen bank accounts had clearly taken a toll. Patricia was wearing a hideous, outdated rented dress that did not fit her properly. Rebecca was desperately trying to smooth down a cheap, poorly tailored gown with the security tag clearly still attached to the back zipper. They looked pathetic. The wealthy elites they so desperately tried to impress were sidestepping them in absolute disgust. Rebecca was screaming at the bouncer, waving her hands wildly. "You have to let us inside right now!" Rebecca shrieked, her voice echoing over the polite chatter of the wealthy guests. "My brother is the guest of honor. He is marrying the host of this gala. We are family." The bouncer crossed his massive arms, completely unamused by her loud entitlement. "Your names are not on the approved guest list, ma'am. Step away from the velvet ropes, or I will have you physically removed from the premises." Patricia grabbed the bouncer's sleeve, her face red with sheer panic. "You do not understand. We have to be inside the VIP room. My son specifically demanded we apologize to someone tonight so we can finally get our money back. If we are not up there in 5 minutes, he is going to lose his mind." I glided smoothly up the remaining stairs, my crimson gown flowing behind me like a river of blood. I stepped right up to the velvet rope, standing directly next to my humiliated mother-in-law and sister-in-law. They both turned their heads, ready to snap at whoever dared to stand so close to them. Patricia's jaw dropped open. Rebecca gasped, taking a stumbling step backward. They stared at me in absolute horror as I walked right past the velvet ropes. I left Patricia and Rebecca frozen on the red carpet, their mouths gaping like fish out of water. I did not give them a second glance. My crimson silk gown swept across the marble foyer of the downtown Grand Hotel. The opulence of Fiona's charity gala was suffocating, dripping in imported crystal chandeliers and massive arrangements of white orchids. Every detail of this glittering event was paid for by blood money. I kept my posture straight, radiating a confidence I had built from 5 years of grueling survival. Before I could even reach out to grab a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, two massive men in tailored black suits materialized on either side of me. They were Fiona's private security detail. They did not ask for my invitation. They simply placed heavy, intimidating hands on my waist and guided me forcefully toward a concealed private elevator hidden behind a velvet curtain. We rode up to the penthouse level in absolute suffocating silence. When the doors opened, they shoved me roughly through a set of heavy oak double doors into a luxurious VIP suite. The moment the doors clicked shut, the heavy thumping bass from the ballroom downstairs instantly vanished. The room was entirely soundproofed. David stood by the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city skyline. He wore a sharply tailored tuxedo, looking like a billionaire playboy, but his face was obscured by a black surgical mask. He was keeping his identity hidden, just in case any wandering guests or hotel staff caught a glimpse of the dead man walking. Richard sat comfortably behind a massive mahogany desk, casually pouring himself a generous glass of expensive scotch, as if he owned the entire building. Richard slammed a heavy bank-encrypted tablet onto the glass coffee table between us. The screen glowed brightly with the logo of the private Swiss bank demanding a biometric signature. "Sign the biometric release right now," Richard demanded, his voice thick with arrogant authority. "We have wasted enough time humoring your little revenge fantasies. You have your audience. Now give us our money." I touched the diamond brooch pinned securely to my collar, feeling the microscopic FBI wire humming faintly against my skin. I needed to keep them talking. I needed the full confession recorded in high-definition audio and video. I ignored the glowing tablet on the table and began pacing the luxurious suite, my stiletto heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor. "You really expect me to just sign over $93 million without knowing exactly how you pulled this massive illusion off?" I asked loudly, ensuring the hidden microphone picked up every single syllable. "You are a failed businessman, Richard." David was a mediocre clerk who complained about paying the electric bill. How did two absolute failures pull off a flawless faked death and accumulate an offshore empire without getting caught by the feds? David ripped the black surgical mask off his face, his eyes flashing with deeply insulted pride. "I am not a clerk," he snarled, stepping aggressively toward me. "I am a visionary." Fiona's father needed a clean, untraceable conduit to wash his illegal commercial real estate funds. I built the shell companies from scratch. I structured the offshore accounts using Jamal's veterinary clinic tax identification numbers. We moved millions of dollars right under the nose of the federal government while you were crying over late rent notices. I am a genius. I scoffed, crossing my arms and looking him up and down with sheer disgust. Moving digital money is one thing, I challenged, pushing him further into the trap. But faking a death, bribing a county coroner, you two cowards do not have the stomach for actual murder. You probably hired a proxy or some street thug to do your dirty work. Richard slammed his scotch glass down onto the desk, his fragile male ego completely unable to handle the insult. You ignorant woman! Richard spat, standing up and pointing a trembling finger right at my chest. We did not need to hire anyone. I orchestrated the entire factory fire myself. I found that homeless addict sleeping in the alleyway behind the loading docks. He was a nobody. A ghost. We dragged him inside the warehouse, injected him with a lethal dose of ketamine, and stripped him completely naked. David eagerly chimed in, desperate to claim equal credit for his own supposed brilliance. I dressed the unconscious body in my own work clothes, David bragged, stepping closer so I could see the malicious pride in his eyes. I left my silver wedding ring on his finger and shoved my leather wallet into his front pocket. We poured 10 gallons of gasoline over the entire warehouse floor and struck the match together. It was an absolute masterpiece of deception. Fiona's father handled the medical examiner with a simple $50,000 bribe. They signed off on the dental records without even opening the charred body bag. We burned a man alive and walked away with $93 million while you planned my pathetic funeral. I kept my face perfectly neutral, masking the intense disgust churning in my stomach. Every gruesome detail, every name, every arrogant admission of premeditated murder was streaming directly to Agent Mitchell and the heavily armed SWAT team waiting downstairs. They had the unshakable confession. Now I just needed to stretch the clock for a few more minutes until the breach. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors swung open. Fiona marched into the soundproof room, her glittering silver gown dragging aggressively across the expensive carpet. She locked the heavy deadbolt behind her. Her eyes were manic, darting wildly from David to me. "What is taking so long?" Fiona shrieked, her perfectly manicured hands trembling with sheer panic. "My father just texted me from the lobby. His security team flagged several unmarked black vans pulling into the loading dock downstairs. Something is wrong. We need to initiate the transfer and get on the private jet to Zurich right now." I crossed my arms, staring down at the glowing bank tablet resting on the coffee table. "I do not think I am ready to sign my name just yet," I said with a slow, deliberate smile. Fiona let out a scream of absolute frustration. She reached into her silver clutch purse and pulled out a matte black pistol fitted with a heavy metal silencer. She raised her arm without hesitation, pointing the deadly barrel directly at the center of my chest. "Sign the biometric release." Fiona commanded, her finger tightening dangerously on the trigger. "Sign it or you die right now." Fiona pressed the cold metal barrel of the silenced pistol directly against my chest. Her hand shook with adrenaline and greed. Richard stood behind her, his face flushed with impatient fury. David stepped closer, his eyes fixed hungrily on the glowing screen of the banking tablet resting on the glass coffee table. He did not care that his new fiancée held a loaded weapon to his legal wife's heart. He only cared about the $93 million trapped behind my biometric wall. I looked down at the weapon, then up into Fiona's desperate eyes. I did not flinch. I did not beg for my life. I simply let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed in the soundproof VIP suite. "You are pathetic, Fiona. All of you. You built a house of cards on the back of a murdered homeless man, and you actually believe you can just fly away to Zurich and live happily ever after." "Shut your mouth and sign the release!" David roared, slamming his fist onto the coffee table. The tablet rattled against the glass. "The private jet is waiting on the tarmac. We are leaving tonight. Do not make her pull that trigger, Abigail. You have no way out." I slowly raised my hands in a gesture of surrender. I kept my movements deliberate, ensuring the diamond brooch pinned to my crimson gown captured a perfect, unobstructed view of Fiona holding the firearm and David issuing the threat. Agent Mitchell had his confession. The Federal Wire had transmitted every single arrogant admission of murder, bribery, and money laundering directly to the tactical teams surrounding the hotel. "All right," I said, keeping my voice utterly devoid of emotion. "If taking this money is the only way you will leave me alone, I will sign it." Fiona lowered the pistol just a fraction of an inch, a triumphant smirk spreading across her face. Richard let out a heavy sigh of relief, loosening his silk tie. David practically vibrated with excitement. He shoved the tablet toward the edge of the table and held out the digital stylus. I reached out and took the stylus from his sweaty fingers. I leaned over the glowing screen. The Swiss bank's biometric security protocol required my precise signature to lift the global freeze. I pressed the tip of the stylus against the glass. I took my time tracing every curve and line of my name with agonizing slowness. I wanted them to savor this false victory. I wanted them to taste the $93 million before I ripped it away permanently. As I lifted the stylus, completing the final stroke of my signature, the system chimed a positive confirmation. The authorization was approved. David let out a loud, victorious cheer. He aggressively snatched the tablet right out of my hands, pushing me backward. He frantically tapped the screen, navigating to the offshore transfer portal. Fiona lowered her weapon completely, stepping to his side to watch the screen. Richard leaned over David's shoulder, his greedy eyes wide. "Say goodbye to your poverty, Abby." David mocked, his finger hovering over the final confirmation button. "Thanks for doing the heavy lifting. We will be sure to send you a postcard from the Alps." He slammed his finger down on the button, reading "Execute Transfer." A heavy, suffocating silence filled the soundproof suite. The three of them stared at the tablet, waiting for the green confirmation screen that would signal their ultimate triumph. Instead, the screen flickered. A blaring, bright red error message illuminated their horrified faces. The text flashed across the display in bold, unforgiving letters. "Error 404, assets seized by the Federal Bureau of Investigation." David gasped, his breath catching in his throat. He tapped the screen frantically, his fingers leaving smudges across the red error message. "No, this is impossible. The system is glitching. Hit refresh, Richard. Hit refresh." Richard grabbed the tablet, his face turning an ashen gray. "It is not a glitch, David. The feds have the money. The accounts are completely gone." Fiona dropped her silenced pistol onto the carpet, stepping away from David as if he were suddenly highly contagious. "You idiot," Fiona shrieked, clutching her designer hair. "You told my father your financial structure was bulletproof. You brought the feds right to our doorstep." David turned his head slowly, his panicked eyes locking onto mine. He saw the cold, victorious smile spreading across my face. He looked at the diamond brooch pinned to my dress, finally noticing the unnatural glint of the microscopic lens. "You wiretapped me!" David screamed, his voice cracking with absolute hysteria. "You set us up!" I took a step back, folding my arms. "You thought you could burn a man alive, steal an empire, and leave me in the dirt. I told you, David. I am the one holding the power. Enjoy federal prison." A primal, animalistic roar tore from David's throat. He lunged across the glass coffee table, his hands reaching desperately for my throat. I braced myself for the impact, but before his fingers could even brush my skin, the heavy, reinforced oak doors of the VIP suite exploded inward. Wood and metal shattered violently into the room. A heavily armed FBI SWAT team stormed the suite, their tactical boots thundering against the carpet. "Get down on the ground," a federal agent bellowed, his voice booming over a megaphone. "Show me your hands. Show me your hands right now." Red laser sights instantly painted the chests of David, Richard, and Fiona. Jamal sprinted into the room right behind the tactical team, locking eyes with me to ensure I was safe. I gave him a quick, firm nod. David froze in midair, his hands hovering inches from my neck. A SWAT operator tackled him around the waist, slamming him brutally onto the shattered glass of the coffee table. David screamed in pain as zip ties secured his wrists behind his back. Two other agents shoved Richard against the mahogany desk, kicking his legs apart and cuffing him efficiently. Fiona fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably, as an agent kicked her discarded pistol away and pushed her face down into the carpet. Agent Mitchell strode into the chaotic room, holstering his weapon. He looked down at my ex-husband writhing on the floor. "David, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent, and I highly suggest you use it because we have everything on tape." The room smelled of splintered wood and absolute defeat. The invincible syndicate had fallen in less than 60 seconds. I stood tall in my crimson gown, watching the men who tortured me squirm in federal custody. Jamal stepped beside me, offering a quiet, victorious smile. "We did it, Abigail. They are finished." Before I could respond, a shrill, hysterical scream echoed from the hallway. Patricia and Rebecca, having heard the massive explosion of the suite doors, burst through the tactical perimeter. They had sneaked past the velvet ropes during the commotion. Patricia stopped dead in her tracks, taking in the sight of her husband and son, pinned to the floor in handcuffs. Her eyes darted to the shattered tablet displaying the federal seizure notice. Patricia realized in a split second that her billionaire dreams were completely dead. Her mansion, her status, her stolen wealth were all gone forever. The sudden crushing weight of reality snapped her fragile mind. She let out a feral shriek, her eyes locking onto me with murderous intent. "You ruined us!" Patricia screamed, charging into the room. She blindly grabbed a heavy, solid bronze statue from Richard's desk, raising it high above her head. She swung the massive metal weapon wildly, aiming the lethal blow directly at my skull. I did not even have time to raise my hands or scream for help at all. Before the heavy bronze statue could crush my skull, Jamal lunged bravely across the shattered glass of the coffee table. He moved with sudden lightning speed, intercepting Patricia mid-swing. He grabbed her wrist with one strong hand and drove his broad shoulder hard into her chest, taking her straight down to the plush carpet. The heavy metal statue flew from her grip, cracking the floorboards beneath us. Jamal pinned her struggling arms behind her back with absolute flawless precision. A federal agent immediately rushed over, slapping cold steel handcuffs onto Patricia. She thrashed wildly against the floor, screaming loudly that her perfect life was ruined forever, but her desperate wails were entirely ignored by everyone in the room. I smoothed the fabric of my crimson gown, entirely unfazed by the violent outburst. The tactical team began dragging David, Richard, Patricia, and Fiona out of the destroyed suite. I turned to Jamal. "Let us finish this," I said. Jamal nodded, patting his suit pocket, where the stolen flash drive rested securely. We walked out of the VIP room, leaving the federal agents to process the crime scene. We stepped out onto the landing overlooking the grand ballroom. Hundreds of wealthy elites, business magnates, and local press members were gathered below, clinking champagne glasses and laughing under the massive crystal chandeliers. They had absolutely no idea a federal raid was unfolding right above their heads. I descended the sweeping marble staircase with Jamal right beside me. Heads began to turn. The shimmering red silk of my gown commanded attention, but it was the fierce, unyielding look on my face that silenced the polite chatter. I walked straight past the bewildered guests and headed directly for the elevated audio-visual booth at the back of the room. The DJ looked at me in utter confusion as I approached his soundboard. Jamal did not ask for permission. He unplugged the main music cable, cutting the upbeat jazz music completely dead. The sudden silence in the massive ballroom was deafening. Jamal shoved the DJ aside and plugged the encrypted flash drive directly into the master projection system. He hit a few keys on the soundboard keyboard. The gigantic digital screens framing the ballroom stage flickered to life. Instead of displaying the logo for the charity gala, the screens illuminated with high-definition screenshots of the family group chats. Gasps erupted across the room as the wealthy guests read the undeniable evidence of fraud. There were texts from Richard explicitly ordering the bribery of the county medical examiner. There were messages from Fiona complaining about how much the fake death certificate cost her father. But the most damning evidence was the massive, detailed money laundering ledgers displaying every single illegal transaction flowing through the commercial real estate empire. The crowd erupted into chaotic murmurs. Reporters immediately raised their cameras, snapping photos of the projected ledgers and recording the explosive evidence. I grabbed the DJ microphone and stepped up to the edge of the booth, my voice booming clearly across the massive space. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, silencing the completely panicked crowd. "Welcome to the real charity gala tonight. The dirty money funding this opulent event was completely stolen. It was laundered through shell companies by the very people hosting you right now. They burned a homeless man alive to fake a death, all to hide $93 million from the federal government." My words struck the room like a physical blow. Total pandemonium broke out. Guests began shouting in disbelief. Suddenly, the main ballroom doors burst open. Another heavily armed tactical unit swarmed the floor. The agents marched straight through the terrified crowd of elites. They surrounded Fiona's father, the untouchable real estate tycoon who had built his empire on bribes and blood money. The tycoon tried to protest, demanding to call his high-priced lawyers, but the agents slammed him against a cocktail table, cuffing his hands tightly behind his back. The press cameras flashed relentlessly, capturing the spectacular downfall of the city's most corrupt billionaire, live on the ballroom floor. I was dragged out in absolute disgrace, his legacy permanently destroyed in front of his peers. I handed the microphone back to the stunned DJ and walked back down to the main floor. The tactical team from the VIP suite was now escorting my in-laws through the ballroom toward the exit. The guests backed away in horror as David, Richard, Patricia, and Fiona were paraded through the crowd in handcuffs. Then I saw Rebecca. She was sobbing hysterically as a female federal agent pulled her by the arm. Rebecca spotted me walking toward her, her face twisted into a mask of pure desperate panic. "Abigail, please tell them I had absolutely nothing to do with the murder," Rebecca screamed, her voice cracking loudly as she struggled uselessly against the federal agent. "I did not know they burned an innocent man alive. I swear it on my life. I just wanted the money to keep my luxury lifestyle and my expensive clothes. You have to tell them I am innocent of this horrible crime. You have to save me. Please, Abigail, please help me." I stopped right in front of her, staring coldly. I looked at the terrified, trembling woman who had violently yanked my wedding necklace off my throat and mocked me for working hard in the dirt. I slowly opened my designer silver clutch purse. I reached deep inside and pulled out the crumpled, torn $5,000 check Patricia had arrogantly thrown at my face on the rainy day of David's fake funeral. I stepped uncomfortably close to Rebecca, looking her dead in the eyes, without a single ounce of pity. I folded the check neatly in half and tucked it firmly into the metal chain of her heavy steel handcuffs. "Use it for your own personal commissary account," I whispered softly. I stepped back in the grand hallway, leaving Rebecca shivering in federal custody. The chaotic ballroom quickly faded into a massive blur of flashing cameras as local authorities completely cleared the building. The glittering facade of Fiona's charity gala was dead, replaced by the cold, unforgiving reality of the justice system. Within 48 hours, the spectacle moved straight into the austere walls of the United States District Court. The arraignment was a fast-paced slaughterhouse. I sat in the front row with Jamal. We watched bailiffs march David, Richard, Patricia, and Fiona into the courtroom. Chained at the wrists and ankles, wearing standard orange jumpsuits, their arrogant personas were stripped away. They looked pathetic and terrified. The presiding judge, a stern man with zero tolerance for white-collar criminals, stared down at them like an executioner. Fiona's expensive legal team arrogantly demanded immediate bail, citing her family's deep community ties. The judge did not even let them finish. He slammed his gavel down, his voice echoing like thunder. "The prosecution has provided this court with overwhelming digital and audio evidence," the judge announced coldly. "We have recordings of premeditated murder confessions, documented bribery of public officials, and ledgers detailing a $93 million international money laundering syndicate. You burned a vulnerable human being alive to protect illicit assets. You are extreme flight risks. Bail is entirely denied for all 4 defendants. You will remain in federal custody until your trial." Fiona collapsed against the defense table, sobbing hysterically. David frantically yanked at his chains, shouting at his lawyer, but armed guards forced him back down. Richard simply stared blankly at the floor, realizing his entire commercial real estate empire was annihilated. Then it was Patricia's turn. My former mother-in-law, who had mercilessly tormented me for 5 years and kicked me out into the freezing rain, played her final card. She threw herself onto the courtroom floor, weeping uncontrollably and begging for mercy. She claimed her husband and son had manipulated her, insisting she had no idea about the money laundering or the faked death. Her lawyer filed a plea of temporary insanity, arguing the extreme stress of losing her son caused a severe psychological break. She cried out that she was just a fragile, grieving mother who needed psychiatric help, not a federal prison sentence. The federal prosecutor did not hesitate. He stood up and requested permission to submit Exhibit B directly to the court. The judge nodded. The prosecutor pressed a button on his laptop, and the audio recording from the VIP room filled the courtroom. Patricia's shrill voice blasted through the high-quality speakers for everyone to hear. The recording captured the exact moment Patricia charged at me in the hotel suite. Her voice was pure malice as she screamed about her billionaire dreams being ruined, followed by the terrifying sound of her violently swinging the heavy bronze statue at my head. The audio was crystal clear. There was no grief in her tone. There was no insanity. There was only premeditated lethal rage fueled entirely by financial greed and pure entitlement. The judge glared down at Patricia, utterly disgusted. "You are not insane, madam," the judge stated, his voice dripping with absolute contempt. "You are calculating, violent, and entirely complicit in this horrific enterprise. This court officially charges you with conspiracy to commit murder and attempted homicide. You will stand trial alongside your husband and your son." Patricia let out a guttural shriek as the bailiffs hoisted her off the floor and dragged her forcefully toward the holding cells. Her desperate screams echoed down the long hallway until the heavy steel doors slammed shut, silencing her completely. Rebecca avoided federal prison time because she was deemed too incompetent by her own father and brother. She had been kept entirely out of the complex offshore transfers and the horrific murder plot. Her reality, however, was far from a victory. The judge slapped her with massive civil fraud penalties for her eager participation in attempting to drain Jamal's veterinary clinic accounts. As the criminal proceedings concluded, Jamal's lawyer stepped forward to finalize family court matters. The judge signed the expedited divorce decree right there on the bench. Rebecca stood frozen at the defense table wearing the same ruined dress from the charity gala. She had no money, no husband, and no home to return to. The massive civil fines meant her future wages would be heavily garnished for the rest of her natural life. She was legally penniless and completely homeless. Jamal walked past her without a single glance, his head held high, finally free from the toxic leech that tried to destroy his hard-earned career. I walked out of the courtroom, the heavy wooden doors closing firmly behind me. The city air felt crisp and incredibly clean. The suffocating weight I had carried for 5 grueling years was finally lifted off my shoulders. I took a deep breath ready to start my brand new life today. As I reached the grand marble staircase just outside the federal courthouse, I heard heavy footsteps approaching quickly from behind. I turned to see the lead federal prosecutor jogging toward me, clutching a thick manila folder. He stopped a few feet away, catching his breath, and gave me a very serious, calculating look. "Mrs. Abigail," the lead prosecutor said, his tone shifting to careful professionalism, "I apologize for intercepting you so quickly, but we have a pressing financial matter that requires your immediate attention." I crossed my arms, feeling a sudden spike of defensive adrenaline rush through my veins. My part in this investigation is officially over. The prosecutor shook his head slowly, holding the thick folder out toward me with an intense expression. "Your part in the criminal trial is over," he corrected, his eyes locking directly onto mine. "But we need to discuss the $93 million we seized from the Swiss accounts last night. You are not walking away from this empty-handed." I stared at the thick manila folder in his outstretched hand, my heart hammering against my ribs. I did not reach for it immediately. I had spent 5 years being lied to about money, and I was not about to blindly walk into another financial trap. I demanded to know exactly what he meant. The federal government does not simply hand out millions of dollars to the wives of convicted money launderers. The lead prosecutor smiled a sharp, respectful smile. He opened the manila folder and pulled out a crisp document bearing the official seal of the Internal Revenue Service. He explained that under the IRS whistleblower office law, private citizens who provide direct actionable evidence leading to the successful seizure of massive illicit funds are legally entitled to a percentage of the recovered assets. "Your flash drive handed us the entire global syndicate on a silver platter," he stated, his voice echoing slightly against the marble pillars of the courthouse. "Without your audio recordings and the decrypted ledgers you stole from Richard's home office, that $93 million would have vanished into untraceable cryptocurrency wallets. You did not just assist an investigation, you delivered the killing blow." I looked down at the official federal document. The printed text outlined the mandatory whistleblower reward parameters. Because the seized amount was so extraordinarily high, the government was required by law to pay out a mandatory 15% reward to the informant. I stood frozen on the courthouse steps doing the mental math. 15% of $93 million. The prosecutor handed me a sleek government-issued pen. We are processing a completely legal tax-free federal wire transfer directly into your personal account, he confirmed, watching my eyes widen in absolute shock. You are receiving exactly $13,950,000. The funds are entirely clean, totally untethered from your husband's criminal enterprise, and ready for immediate withdrawal. My breath caught in my throat. $13,950,000. David had forced me to work 3 grueling shifts a day at the plant nursery. He had screamed at me for buying a cheap cup of coffee because it ruined our strict household budget. Now the very federal agents who locked him in a maximum security holding cell were handing me a staggering fortune for turning him in. But the prosecutor was not finished. He pulled out a second stack of legal paperwork, this one stamped by the state family court. There is another matter we finalized this morning, he continued, handing me the fresh documents. David completely faked his death and altered his identity to marry Fiona. Because his death certificate has been officially voided by the state, his subsequent marriage to the real estate tycoon's daughter is legally classified as bigamy. Fiona is not his wife. She never was. You are still his sole legal spouse. I stared at him, grasping the massive implication of his words. Because I was still his legal wife, the federal government was releasing all of David's original legitimate pre-fraud assets directly to me. The luxury vehicles he had hidden under shell company, names the high-yield investment portfolios he had built before linking up with Fiona's corrupt father, and the expensive suburban rental properties his family had used to evict me into the freezing rain. It all belonged to me now. Every single brick, every single dollar, every single vehicle, I owned it all. I signed the IRS whistleblower documents right there on the concrete steps of the federal courthouse. I handed the folder back to the prosecutor, thanked him for his relentless work, and walked straight to my battered floral delivery van. The very next morning, I walked into the local branch of my standard commercial bank. It was the exact same bank where David used to deposit his fake $700 monthly paychecks to keep up his illusion of poverty. I sat down across from a junior financial advisor and handed her the federal authorization forms. When the screen loaded my new available balance, the advisor physically dropped her computer mouse. She offered me premium coffee private wealth management services and endless apologies for making me wait in the standard lobby line. I simply smiled, requested a certified proof of funds letter, and walked out into the bright morning sun. I did not go to a luxury car dealership. I did not buy designer trench coats or expensive diamond necklaces like Rebecca and Patricia would have done. I drove my old dirt-stained van straight to a commercial real estate broker. I slapped the certified proof of funds letter onto his desk and purchased 3 massive plots of undeveloped commercial land on the edge of the city. I paid entirely in cash. I was not interested in buying flashy toys to show off to strangers. I was going to build an impenetrable botanical empire from the soil up. I was going to construct massive state-of-the-art greenhouses and landscape design centers that would dominate the local market. I was laying the groundwork for a legacy that nobody could ever steal from me again. 2 days later, I was standing in the middle of my newly purchased commercial lot, wearing my scuffed work boots and mapping out the blueprints for the main greenhouse foundation. The air smelled of fresh dirt and absolute freedom. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was an incoming collect call from the County Maximum Security Correctional Facility. I stared at the screen, a cold smirk spreading across my face. I pressed the accept button and held the phone to my ear. The automated prison system prompt played, followed immediately by the desperate, ragged voice of my husband. "Abby, please do not hang up," David begged, his voice cracking with sheer, unfiltered panic. The background noise of the chaotic jail block echoed loudly behind him. "You have to help me. The public defender they assigned me is completely useless. He says I am looking at 40 years in federal prison. Fiona's father hired a massive legal team, and they are pinning the entire money laundering operation on me. You have the $13 million from the feds. You have my legitimate assets. Please. Abby, hire a high-profile defense attorney for me. I can explain everything. I still love you. We can still fix this. Please just pay for a lawyer. I am begging you. I held the phone to my ear, listening to his pathetic, desperate sobbing echoing from the county jail block. I did not hang up immediately. I let his panic wash over me, savoring the absolute reversal of our roles. He was begging the woman he treated like disposable dirt to save him from a concrete cage. I told him I would come see him in person. I did not promise him a lawyer. I simply promised him a visit. The drive to the maximum security federal penitentiary took 2 hours, leading me far away from the thriving greenery of my commercial greenhouses and into a barren, desolate landscape of gray concrete and razor wire. I parked my luxury SUV in the visitor lot, stepping out into the harsh, biting wind. I wore a tailored crimson blazer and pristine white trousers, a sharp, deliberate contrast to the drab, suffocating atmosphere of the facility. I passed through 3 separate metal detectors, handed over my identification, and walked down a long, sterile corridor smelling faintly of bleach and absolute despair. I sat down in the cramped visitor booth. A thick sheet of bulletproof plexiglass separated me from the inmate holding area. The glass was scratched and smudged, a physical barrier standing permanently between my hard-earned freedom and his eternal cage. I waited in utter silence. A heavy steel door buzzed loudly and slid open on the other side. A heavily armed guard escorted David into the booth. The sight of him almost made me laugh out loud. The arrogant billionaire playboy who had confidently orchestrated a murder and a $93 million international heist was completely gone. In his place was a broken, terrified shell of a man. He wore a faded, oversized orange jumpsuit that swallowed his rapidly shrinking frame. His skin was pasty and pale, completely devoid of the expensive tans he used to get while vacationing with Fiona. His hair was greasy, unkempt, and thinning aggressively. Dark, bruised circles hung heavily under his bloodshot eyes. He looked haggard, desperate, and completely stripped of his former aura of invincibility. He practically threw himself into the metal chair, grabbing the heavy black telephone receiver with violently shaking hands. I picked up my receiver, slowly maintaining eye contact, and brought it to my ear. Abby, David gasped, his voice cracking with a mix of pathetic relief and sheer panic. You came. Thank God you actually came. Did you bring the legal team? Did you sign the retainer fee? They are trying to move me to solitary confinement, Abby. The other inmates know about the missing money. You have to get me out of here today. I can make it up to you. I swear I will make it up to you. I did not say a single word. I just watched him squirm, my face an impenetrable mask of cold, calculated indifference. I slowly reached into my designer leather handbag. I bypassed my car keys and my wallet, pulling out a single high-resolution printed photograph. I held it up and pressed it flat against the thick plexiglass, positioning it right in front of his face. David stopped babbling instantly. He squinted at the image, his brow furrowing in deep confusion as his brain tried to process what he was looking at. The photograph captured a massive, chaotic construction zone, but underneath the heavy yellow machinery and the torn-up earth, the outline of the property boundary was unmistakable. It was the exact suburban rental house where we used to live. It was the exact same front porch where his mother had thrown my clothes into garbage bags and kicked me out into the freezing rain on the day of his fake funeral. But the house was no longer standing. The photograph showed a massive industrial bulldozer parked directly on top of shattered wood, crushed brick, and pulverized drywall. "What is this?" David whispered into the receiver, his hands trembling violently against the glass partition. "I used your legitimate assets to purchase the property directly from your parents' holding company," I stated, my voice smooth and dangerously calm. "Then I hired a commercial demolition crew. I had them completely bulldoze the house, the porch, the driveway, and every single memory attached to it. I am paving over the entire lot with thick black asphalt. It is going to serve as the overflow parking facility for my new commercial delivery trucks." David stared at the photograph, his eyes widening in absolute horror as the crushing realization finally crashed down on him. I was not there to save him. I was there to show him that I had completely erased his legacy from the face of the earth. I had taken the very site of my deepest trauma, the place where he and his family had abused me the most, and ground it into dust under my own boots. "You cannot do this to me!" David sobbed, hot tears spilling over his pale, sunken cheeks. He pressed his free hand against the glass, leaving a sweaty palm print on the barrier. "I am your husband. I am the only reason you have that money. You owe me your life, Abigail. You owe me." "I owe you absolutely nothing," I replied, my tone dropping to a lethal, unforgiving whisper. "You let your family treat me like garbage while you hoarded millions. You burned an innocent homeless man alive just to play pretend with a billionaire's daughter. You built a fake empire on blood and lies, and you expected me to take the fall." I lowered the photograph, folding it neatly and placing it back into my handbag. I looked directly into his terrified, pathetic eyes one last time. "You sold your soul for a lifestyle you could not keep, David," I said, delivering the final blow with absolute surgical precision. "Enjoy your $700 a month in the prison laundry." I did not wait for a response. I pulled the receiver away from my ear and placed it firmly back onto the metal hook with a loud final click. His voice was instantly cut off, silencing his desperate pleas forever. I stood up from the metal chair, smoothed the fabric of my blazer, and turned my back on him. Behind the thick, soundproof glass, I could see David screaming in absolute despair. He slammed his fists against the plexiglass, his face contorted in agony as he slid down the clear wall, sobbing uncontrollably onto the floor. I walked out of the visitor booth without looking back a single time. I navigated the labyrinth of concrete hallways, following the painted yellow lines, back toward the main administration lobby. The heavy electronic doors buzzed and clanked shut behind me, sealing the darkness away. I stepped into the bright, sterile lobby, taking a deep breath of the clean air. As I walked toward the final security checkpoint, someone stepped out of the adjacent legal consultation wing. We nearly collided in the hallway. I stepped back, looking up to see Jamal. He was wearing a sharp charcoal suit, holding a sleek leather briefcase securely under his arm. He looked just as surprised to see me, but a warm, genuine smile quickly spread across his face, easing the tension of the environment. "Abigail," Jamal said, his deep voice carrying a note of pleasant surprise. "What are you doing in this miserable place, taking out the trash one last time?" I replied, offering a confident, relaxed smile. "What about you?" Jamal patted his leather briefcase with a satisfied sigh. "Serving Rebecca with the final financial severance documents. She tried to demand alimony from a jail cell, claiming she was entitled to my veterinary clinic's profits. My lawyers just shut it down permanently in front of the mediator. I am officially completely free." We looked at each other, two survivors who had endured the absolute worst of a toxic, narcissistic family and emerged completely victorious. We had been treated as the scapegoats, the outsiders meant to be drained and discarded. Instead, we had reclaimed our lives, our wealth, and our absolute independence. "Let us get out of here," I said. Jamal nodded in agreement. We walked side by side through the final set of heavy glass double doors. We left the cold, oppressive shadow of the federal penitentiary behind us, stepping together straight into the warm, brilliant sunlight. We walked into the bright sunlight, leaving the maximum security prison behind. The iron gates slammed shut, sealing David and his arrogance away. Jamal adjusted his sunglasses, offering me a sharp, victorious smile. We walked to our cars, two survivors who had rewritten our destinies. Fast forward 6 months. I stood right in the center of a massive commercial plot on the edge of the city. The dirt had been transformed into an architectural marvel of glass and steel. I looked up at the towering glass domes of my new empire. The illuminated sign above the entrance read, "Phoenix Botanicals." It was a multi-million-dollar botanical distribution center built from the ground up using my federal reward and David's liquidated assets. I walked through the climate-controlled aisles, breathing in the scent of damp earth, exotic orchids, and citrus trees. I was no longer the exhausted wife scrubbing floors to pay for a ghost's student loans. I wore a tailored emerald green pantsuit and walked with the authority of a self-made tycoon. My empire had a very specific, uncompromising mission. I sat in my sunlit corner office reviewing employee applications. I deliberately bypassed resumes with traditional corporate backgrounds. Instead, I looked for the gaps in employment. I looked for the subtle signs of struggle. My manager sent in the next candidate, a nervous young woman clutching a battered tote bag. She sat across from my desk, apologizing for her lack of recent references, explaining she had just escaped a financially abusive marriage. She expected me to reject her. I handed her a commercial landscaping contract with full health benefits, a flexible schedule, and a starting salary, double the minimum wage. "You are hired," I stated, watching the shock wash over her face. "Welcome to Phoenix Botanicals. We do not just grow plants here, we rebuild lives." My entire workforce was comprised exclusively of women who had survived financial deception and domestic abuse. I turned my commercial empire into an impenetrable safe haven. I provided them with living wages, free legal consulting, and the dignity of financial independence. We were an army of women who had been treated as disposable, now controlling the most profitable botanical center in the state. While my empire thrived in the sunlight, the reality for the people who tried to destroy me was different. Across the city, freezing rain battered the cracked pavement of a neglected strip mall. The glass doors of a cheap fast food restaurant groaned open. Rebecca, my former sister-in-law, stood behind the sticky counter wearing a grease-stained uniform. She held a filthy mop in her hands, her shoulders slumped in absolute defeat. A manager yelled from the kitchen, tossing a bucket of bleach at her feet, ordering her to scrub the public restrooms before her shift ended. Rebecca flinched, biting her lip to keep from crying. She dragged the heavy mop across the slippery floor. She no longer had access to platinum credit cards or designer trench coats. The federal judge had frozen her out of the family's illicit wealth and slapped her with catastrophic civil fraud penalties for attempting to drain Jamal's accounts. Every Friday, the state automatically garnished 70% of Rebecca's minimum wage paycheck. She was forced to hand over her meager earnings to the court-ordered restitution fund to repay Jamal for her attempted theft. When her grueling 12-hour shift ended, Rebecca stepped out into the freezing rain. She did not have a luxury sports car waiting for her. She pulled the hood of her thin jacket over her head and sprinted toward the corner bus stop. She missed the bus by 10 seconds. The heavy tires splashed a wave of dirty street water directly onto her legs. She collapsed onto the wet metal bench, shivering violently in the dark, entirely penniless and legally homeless, paying the ultimate price for her unhinged greed. Back at Phoenix Botanicals, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. The official grand opening was exactly 1 week away. I was organizing a massive citywide charity drive. I wanted to spit in the face of Fiona's father and his corrupt, money-laundering fake philanthropies. Every cent of profit from our opening week was pledged directly to local domestic violence shelters. The brass bell of my office chimed. Jamal walked in carrying a tray of iced coffees and a wide, genuine smile. His veterinary clinic was thriving like never before, now that the toxic leeches of his former in-laws were legally barred from his life. He looked completely rejuvenated, wearing a sharp, casual suit, radiating the calm energy of a man who had won his life back and secured full custody of his assets. "I heard about the charity launch next week," Jamal said, setting a coffee on my desk. "You are pulling out all the stops, Abigail. I want in. I am bringing my mobile veterinary unit to the greenhouse parking lot. I am hosting a completely free pet care clinic for the community all day during your grand opening." I smiled, clinking my plastic cup against his. "I would not have it any other way, Jamal. We make a pretty unbeatable team." We stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, looking out over the thriving commercial greenhouse. It was a beautiful partnership forged in the fires of survival. We had both been treated as the ultimate scapegoats by a family of raging narcissists. Now we were the ones holding all the power, completely dictating the terms of our own success. Suddenly, the flat-screen television mounted on the wall in the employee break room flashed with a bright red breaking news banner. The volume rose sharply as the local news anchor's voice filled the room. We turned our attention to the screen. The bold headlines scrolling across the bottom of the television locked my pulse in place. "The highly anticipated sentencing for the Geneva Syndicate has just been handed down by the federal judge." The news anchor's voice cut through the joyful noise of my grand opening celebration echoing from the main greenhouse just outside my office door. I grabbed the television remote and turned the volume up, my eyes glued to the screen. But to fully appreciate the absolute satisfaction of that moment, you have to understand how perfectly the rest of the day had unfolded. Just 6 hours earlier, I had unlocked the massive glass front doors of Phoenix Botanicals for our official public launch. The morning air was crisp and the line of eager customers already wrapped around the block. Local news vans were parked on the freshly paved asphalt, their camera crews setting up to cover the largest commercial botanical opening the city had seen in a decade. I did not hide from the cameras. I stood confidently on the front steps answering questions from reporters. I was no longer the exhausted, dirt-stained wife hiding in the shadows of a deceitful husband. I wore a tailored emerald green suit that commanded respect. My hair was professionally styled, and my posture radiated the quiet authority of a woman who had built an empire from the ashes of betrayal. The reporters asked about my hiring practices, amazed that my entire staff consisted of women who had escaped financial and domestic abuse. I looked directly into the camera lenses and stated that true wealth is measured by the community you uplift, not the offshore accounts you hide. I knew David and his greedy family would likely see this broadcast from their holding cells. I wanted them to choke on my success. By noon, the registers were ringing non-stop. Customers were purchasing expensive exotic orchids, custom landscaping packages, and organic gardening supplies. My employees walked the aisles with bright, genuine smiles, earning fair wages in a completely safe environment. The contrast between my flourishing greenhouse and the dark, miserable reality my former in-laws now faced was poetic. Right at the height of the midday rush, Jamal pulled his state-of-the-art mobile veterinary clinic into the parking lot. He had volunteered to host a free pet care event for the community to coincide with my grand opening. He stepped out of his gleaming white van, holding the hands of his two young children. They were laughing, wearing matching Phoenix Botanicals t-shirts. Jamal looked entirely transformed. The heavy, exhausted burden he used to carry when married to Rebecca was completely gone. His veterinary practice was booming now that his accounts were secure from his ex-wife's greedy hands. He had full legal custody of his children, and his clinic had just expanded to a second location. He walked over to where I was standing near a display of blooming cherry trees. We hugged, a deep, meaningful embrace between two survivors. His children ran off to look at the butterfly enclosure with one of my trusted managers. Jamal handed me a sleek gift box containing a gold-engraved pen to celebrate the launch. "Look at us," Jamal said, his voice filled with profound pride as he surveyed the packed greenhouse. 5 years ago, we were the outcasts. We were the scapegoats they thought they could bleed dry and discard. Now you own the biggest botanical center in the state, and I am opening my second animal hospital. We did not just survive them, Abigail. We utterly defeated them. I took the gold pen from the box, tracing the engraving with my thumb. "We took our power back," I replied softly, looking at the thriving business around me. "They underestimated us because we were kind. They confused our patience with weakness. They will never make that mistake again." Jamal nodded his eyes, reflecting the same hard-won peace that I felt in my own heart. We stood there together for a long moment, sharing a quiet platonic bond of mutual respect. We had weathered the ultimate betrayal and emerged wealthy, successful, and entirely free. We were the living proof that a narcissistic family structure always collapses when the scapegoats finally stop playing along. After the afternoon rush began to settle, Jamal and I walked back to my private office to take a quick break. I poured us both a glass of sparkling water, and we sat on the plush leather sofa, listening to the muffled sounds of happy customers filtering through the walls. The flat-screen television mounted in the corner was muted, displaying a local news channel. That was when the bright red breaking news banner flashed across the bottom of the screen. I snatched the remote and unmuted the television, my pulse locking in place. The news anchor looked directly into the camera, her expression serious and urgent. "The highly anticipated sentencing for the Geneva Syndicate has just been handed down by the federal judge," the anchor announced, her voice filling my office. After a swift and highly publicized trial, The defendants responsible for a massive international money laundering operation, insurance fraud, and premeditated murder have finally learned their fate. Jamal set his glass of water down on the coffee table, leaning forward with his elbows resting on his knees. "This is it," he whispered, his eyes glued to the high-definition screen. "The final nail in the coffin." I stood up and walked closer to the television, my heart hammering a steady, triumphant rhythm against my ribs. I had waited for this exact moment since the rainy afternoon. I found my clothes thrown in trash bags on my front porch. I had played the long game, navigating threats, bribery, and near-death encounters, all to ensure these monsters faced absolute justice. The news anchor shuffled her papers and looked back at the teleprompter. The courtroom was heavily guarded today, as the judge delivered what legal experts are calling one of the harshest white-collar and violent crime sentences in state history, she continued. First, the ringleader of the financial fraud and the architect of the fatal warehouse arson. The screen cut to a live feed from the federal courthouse steps. A sketch artist's rendering of David appeared on the screen, followed by footage of him being escorted into a prison transport van. He was wearing a bright orange jumpsuit, his hands and ankles bound by heavy metal chains. His arrogant billionaire playboy facade was completely eradicated. He looked pale, terrified, and utterly defeated. I gripped the edge of my mahogany desk, refusing to blink, ready to hear the exact number of years my treacherous husband would spend rotting inside a concrete cage. David has been sentenced to 40 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole, the news anchor stated, her voice crisp and resolute. The judge noted that his calculated manipulation, financial deception, and ultimate disregard for human life warranted the maximum penalty under the law. He will be transferred immediately to a maximum security facility to begin serving his sentence. I let out a slow, steady breath. 40 years. David would be an old, broken man by the time he ever saw the outside of a concrete wall again, assuming he survived that long. He traded his freedom for a fraudulent empire, and now he had absolutely nothing. The news anchor continued reading from her official report. His father and co-conspirator Richard received a sentence of 25 years for his role in structuring the money laundering syndicate and aiding in the cover-up of the warehouse murder. Patricia, the matriarch of the family, was sentenced to 15 years for conspiracy to commit murder and severe financial fraud. Jamal let out a sharp, loud laugh. 15 years for Patricia, Jamal said, shaking his head in sheer disbelief. She thought she was untouchable. She actually believed her country club status made her immune to federal law. Now she gets to spend the next decade and a half folding laundry in a federal penitentiary. I kept my eyes fixed on the television screen. The broadcast shifted away from my former in-laws, displaying a photograph of Fiona's father, the ruthless real estate tycoon who thought he could buy the city. Finally, the anchor announced the central financier of the entire criminal operation has been handed the most severe punishment. The prominent commercial real estate developer has been sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The judge condemned his extensive history of bribing public officials and ordering lethal violence to protect his illicit financial holdings. His massive corporate empire is currently being dismantled and liquidated by federal regulators. I reached for the television remote resting on the edge of my mahogany desk. I pressed the power button. The screen faded to black, silencing the news broadcast instantly. The quiet hum of the Botanical Center returned, replacing the dark reality of the courtroom. I did not cry. I did not feel a single ounce of residual trauma or lingering pain whatsoever. For 5 grueling years, my nervous system had been trapped in a constant state of survival mode. I had endured their relentless psychological abuse, their physical threats, and their calculated betrayals. But standing in my sunlit office today, surrounded by the thriving business I built from the ground up, I felt nothing but a profound, absolute sense of closure. The scales of justice were completely balanced. The monsters who tried to destroy me were locked away forever. "Well," Jamal said, standing up from the leather sofa and straightening his suit jacket, "I should get back to the parking lot. The free pet care clinic is already completely packed, and my veterinary technicians need me." I walked over and gave him a firm, appreciative hug. "I owe you. Thank you for being here, Jamal. We closed this dark chapter together." Jamal smiled warmly, his eyes reflecting pure peace. "We definitely did, Abigail. Now let us get back to doing what we do best." He walked out of my office, heading back to his flourishing veterinary clinic outside. I sat down at my desk, picking up the gold-engraved pen Jamal had gifted me earlier. I had a massive botanical empire to run, and the day was only half over. Over the next few weeks, Phoenix Botanicals exceeded every single financial projection I had mapped out. We became the premier supplier for high-end commercial landscaping across the entire state. But accumulating wealth was no longer my primary goal. I wanted to actively dismantle the toxic legacy left behind by Fiona's father and his corrupt real estate syndicate. His greedy development firm had spent decades buying up affordable neighborhoods, evicting vulnerable families, and replacing community spaces with overpriced concrete high-rises. I decided to use a significant portion of my federal whistleblower reward to launch a massive urban revitalization initiative. I purchased dozens of abandoned, neglected, empty lots, situated directly in the middle of low-income neighborhoods. These were the exact areas Fiona's father had tried to destroy. I sent my dedicated teams of skilled landscapers into these communities. We ripped up the broken concrete and replaced it with rich, fertile soil. We built beautiful, expansive community gardens filled with fresh vegetable plots, fruit trees, and vibrant flower beds. I made sure the gardens were legally protected under community trusts, ensuring no greedy corporate developer could ever buy the land and bulldoze it again. I hired local residents to manage the spaces, providing them with fair wages and fresh produce. Every time I cut the ribbon on a brand new community garden, I felt a deep, radiating sense of triumph. I was taking the dirty money they tried to hide in offshore accounts and planting it directly into the hands of the people they had oppressed. My business model of hiring survivors of financial and domestic abuse was also yielding incredible results. My employees were fiercely loyal, completely transforming the greenhouse into a sanctuary of mutual support and hard work. We were an unstoppable force of women, reclaiming our independence. The dark shadow of David and his family felt like a distant nightmare, completely erased by the bright, flourishing reality I created. One crisp Tuesday morning, I arrived at the Botanical Center early to review inventory shipments. I walked into my private office, setting my coffee on the desk. My assistant had already sorted the morning mail, organizing the envelopes into a neat pile. Most of the mail consisted of standard vendor invoices and commercial landscaping requests. But as I sifted through the stack, a plain, unadorned white envelope caught my attention. It lacked a printed corporate logo or a standard business return address. The handwriting on the front was slightly shaky, written in thick black ink. I turned the envelope over my brow, furrowing in confusion. The return address listed in the top left corner belonged to the primary municipal homeless shelter located in the dusty downtown industrial district. I set my coffee cup down, a sudden, very cold sense of apprehension sharply prickling the back of my neck. I had absolutely never interacted with that specific charity shelter before today. I grabbed a silver letter opener and carefully sliced right through the paper seal. I pulled out a single handwritten sheet of lined notebook paper. The message was brief, but the words immediately made my blood run ice cold. The letter was handwritten by the director of the downtown homeless shelter. It detailed the disappearance of Thomas Jenkins. Thomas was a military veteran who had fallen on hard times. He had been a regular guest at the facility for 3 years. The director wrote that Thomas vanished without a trace on the exact same night the factory exploded. After watching the televised sentencing of the Geneva Syndicate, the director connected the horrifying timeline. He enclosed a photocopy of an old military identification card and local dental clinic records. My chest tightened with profound sorrow and fierce determination. David and Richard had stripped this innocent man of his life and identity to protect their stolen offshore wealth. They treated Thomas like a disposable prop. I refused to let his memory vanish into the void. I picked up my phone and called my legal team. I instructed them to contact the county medical examiner immediately. I authorized a blank check from my whistleblower reward to expedite a private DNA verification. Within 48 hours, the laboratory results confirmed the truth. The body pulled from the factory ashes was not an unidentifiable transient. It was Thomas Jenkins. He finally had his name back. I immediately took full financial responsibility for his remains. I refused to allow a veteran to be discarded in an unmarked county grave. I purchased a premium burial plot in the most serene, beautiful cemetery in the city, situated on a high, grassy hill overlooking the Green Valley. I hired the finest funeral director available and spared absolutely no expense. The morning of the funeral was crisp and bright. Jamal drove me to the cemetery. We walked across the manicured green lawn together. Jamal carried a magnificent wreath of white lilies and blue hydrangeas fresh from the Phoenix Botanicals greenhouse. We laid the vibrant flowers gently against the polished wood of the casket. I had contacted the local Veterans Association, and they provided a full military honor guard. The mournful notes of a bugle playing taps echoed beautifully across the quiet hillside. I stood beside Jamal in my black suit, watching the flag-folding ceremony with deep respect. After the service concluded, I unveiled the monument I commissioned. It was a pristine granite headstone. The engraved gold lettering caught the bright morning sunlight. It read, "Thomas Jenkins, Honorable Veteran, unjustly taken, forever remembered." I did not stop there. Before leaving the cemetery, I initiated a massive wire transfer to the downtown shelter. I donated $2 million in the name of Thomas Jenkins. The funds were earmarked to construct a new residential wing for displaced veterans. His stolen life would directly serve as the foundation to save thousands of others. He would never be a forgotten ghost. While Thomas rested in eternal respected peace, the architect of his murder was currently living in a concrete hell. Miles away inside the bleak walls of a maximum security federal penitentiary, David was experiencing the absolute bottom of human existence. The former mastermind who once controlled $93 million was now trapped inside a cramped freezing cell. He wore a stained, faded orange jumpsuit that hung loosely off his shrinking frame. The arrogant smirk that used to define his handsome face was gone. The heavy steel cell doors slid open for the designated recreation hour. David walked into the chaotic, deafeningly loud prison yard. He kept his head down, his shoulders hunched in perpetual fear. Another inmate, a massive man with tattooed arms, aggressively shoulder-checked him against the cold chain-link fence. David stumbled, his knees hitting the unforgiving asphalt. He did not fight back. He did not display a single ounce of his former pride. The larger inmate demanded the cigarette David had managed to smuggle. David tried to plead, his voice trembling. The inmate did not hesitate. He drove a brutal punch directly into David's jaw. Blood sprayed across the pavement. David collapsed onto his side, coughing and gasping for air. He scrambled desperately across the asphalt on his hands and knees, reaching for the broken cigarette the other inmate had kicked aside. He wiped the blood from his nose with a shaking, filthy hand, completely stripped of his dignity, his power, and his humanity. He had traded his soul for a fortune he could not keep, and this brutal, degrading existence was his permanent reality for the next 40 years. I sat in the vibrant, sunlit sanctuary of my corner office at Phoenix Botanicals, breathing in the fresh, clean scent of blooming orchids. I was miles above the darkness of David's miserable reality. My corporate attorneys sat across from my mahogany desk, laying out a thick stack of finalized legal documents. I picked up my gold-engraved pen and signed my name with smooth, practiced confidence. I was not just running a floral empire anymore. I was establishing the Jenkins Legal Shield. It was a fully funded, non-profit legal organization specifically designed to deploy ruthless elite attorneys to defend vulnerable victims of financial fraud and domestic exploitation. I was using my massive whistleblower fortune to build an impenetrable fortress for the innocent. I slid the signed paperwork back across the smooth wooden desk. My legacy as a fiercely protective force in this city was officially cemented in stone. Nobody would ever be used as a disposable pawn again. The lawyers smiled, packing their briefcases and offering congratulations. They walked out of my office, shutting the glass door, leaving me alone. I stood and walked over to the windows, looking out over my thriving greenhouses. Suddenly, the private secured landline resting on my desk began to ring. I rarely gave that number out to anyone. I turned around slowly and looked at the glowing caller identification screen. It was a restricted, encrypted government number. I picked up the receiver, pressing it against my ear. My pulse quickened as the line clicked open. Agent Mitchell spoke from the encrypted line, his voice calm. I am calling to inform you that the federal asset forfeiture regarding the commercial real estate empire is officially finalized. Every dollar has been tracked, seized, and liquidated. The syndicate is dismantled, Abigail. You are completely clear of any remaining legal proceedings. The case is closed. I thanked him, my voice steady, and slowly placed the receiver back onto its cradle. A profound silence filled my office. There were no more court dates looming over my head. There were no more threats hiding in the shadows. The invisible tether connecting me to David and his monstrous family was severed. I was finally free. The next few months transformed my existence into a beautiful, affluent, and peaceful routine. I moved out of temporary housing and purchased a penthouse overlooking the city skyline. It featured floor-to-ceiling windows, a wraparound terrace, and enough space to cultivate a rooftop garden. I woke up every morning to warm sunlight hitting my face, no longer jolted awake by the shrill panic of multiple alarm clocks demanding I rush to a grueling shift. I hired a private chef, employed a dedicated management team for my expanding business, and began living exclusively for myself. My days were no longer defined by financial terror. I traveled internationally on my own terms. I flew to the rainforests of Costa Rica to source seeds for my commercial nurseries. I spent 2 weeks in the countryside of Japan studying botanical architecture and incorporating those tranquil designs into my corporate landscaping projects. I was no longer just surviving. I was thriving, creating art out of nature on a scale. Corporate clients begged for my design consultations. I accepted only the contracts that aligned with my personal values, turning down any developer who reeked of the same corporate greed that Fiona and her father embodied. Returning to my office after a successful trip to Europe, I sat behind my desk and looked at a framed photograph near my computer. It was a picture of the mud-stained winter coat where I had found the Swiss bank key. I kept it as a daily reminder of where I started. I reflected on the agonizing journey from the rainy afternoon when Patricia threw that $5,000 check at my face to this exact moment, managing a multi-million-dollar botanical and legal empire. My former in-laws had looked at me and seen nothing but a disposable workhorse. They assumed my quiet endurance was a sign of weakness. They were wrong. I realized then that my secret weapon was never the routing number to an offshore account. The money was merely a tool. My true weapon was the relentless work ethic I forged while breaking my back in the dirt for 5 years. It was the unyielding moral compass that prevented me from taking Fiona's bribe and walking away. David had $93 million handed to him on a silver platter, and his greed destroyed him. I had to fight for every inch of my success, and that integrity was why I was sitting in a penthouse while he was rotting in a federal cell. The brass bell at the front of the greenhouse chimed cheerfully, breaking my deep reflection. I walked out of my private office and strolled down the vibrant aisles of Phoenix Botanicals. Jamal stood near the exotic flower display looking incredibly sharp. He wore a tailored navy suit, a crisp white shirt, and a relaxed, happy smile. His posture was different from the exhausted, beaten-down man who used to sit silently at Richard's toxic dinner table. "I see you are dressing to impress today," I called out, wiping a drop of water from a nearby fern. Jamal turned and laughed, a booming sound that filled the greenhouse. "I have a dinner date tonight," Jamal said, his eyes crinkling with joy. "A pediatrician I met at a medical conference last month. I need the most spectacular, beautiful bouquet you have in this entire building. I am not taking any chances." I smiled warmly, stepping behind the main counter to pull a selection of deep purple orchids and white lilies. "You know I always save the best stock for my favorite veterinary doctor," I replied, wrapping the stems in pristine silk ribbon. "How is the new clinic running?" "Better than I ever imagined," Jamal answered, leaning against the glass counter. "We just hired 3 new technicians, and the kids are loving the new house. It is amazing how much you can accomplish when you are not being drained by emotional vampires." I handed him the bouquet. We shared a quiet, knowing look of profound mutual respect. We had both been the designated scapegoats, the outsiders brought into a narcissistic family to be used and discarded. But instead of letting them break us, we had joined forces and dismantled their empire. Our dynamic had evolved into something much stronger than friendship. We were chosen family. We proved that the bonds forged in the fires of survival and mutual respect are stronger than toxic blood ties. Have a wonderful date, Jamal, I said softly. I will, Abigail. See you at the charity drive next week, he replied, taking the flowers and walking out into the bright afternoon. I watched him leave, feeling a deep, radiating warmth expanding in my chest. I turned around and walked slowly toward the exact center of my massive glass greenhouse. The automatic climate vents hummed quietly in the background. The rich, earthy scent of thousands of thriving plants surrounded me like a protective embrace. I stood perfectly still among the towering palms and blooming orchids. Above me, the golden hour sun began its slow descent, pouring thick, honey-colored light directly through the vaulted glass roof. The golden rays washed over my skin, bathing my entire botanical empire in a breathtaking, brilliant glow. I smiled softly, knowing I had won everything. My life was finally mine. The following spring arrived with a vibrant burst of color across the sprawling acres of Phoenix Botanicals. I stood in the center of my private climate-controlled glass atrium, surrounded by the lush greenery I had cultivated with my own 2 hands. I held a polished silver watering can, carefully tipping the spout over the delicate roots of a ghost orchid. It was an incredibly rare, notoriously difficult flower to bloom, requiring perfect conditions, unwavering patience, and absolute resilience. For 5 years, I had been buried in the dark, suffocated by a family who viewed me as nothing more than disposable dirt. They thought burying me under their constant demands and financial abuse would keep me compliant. They did not realize that being buried was exactly what a seed needed to eventually break through the surface and thrive. I gently touched the pristine white petals of the blooming orchid. It had survived against all odds, just like I had. The peaceful silence of my greenhouse was a stark contrast to the chaotic, deafening noise of the federal penitentiary located 300 miles away. In that bleak, unforgiving concrete fortress, the reality of absolute defeat was crushing the people who had tried to destroy me. David was no longer the arrogant mastermind who thought he could outsmart the federal government and burn an innocent man alive. He was currently sitting in solitary confinement, locked inside a tiny windowless cell for 23 hours a day. The prison administration placed him there for his own protection after he accrued massive gambling debts with violent inmates. His hair had thinned dramatically, turning a dull, lifeless gray. He paced the 5-foot stretch of concrete endlessly, muttering to himself about offshore accounts and frozen assets that no longer existed. His brilliant mind had completely fractured under the weight of his own monumental greed. He traded a loyal wife and his freedom for a fabricated empire, and now his entire universe was reduced to 4 gray walls and a stainless steel toilet. He would die in that cell, utterly forgotten by the world he tried to conquer. Patricia was not faring any better in the minimum security facility for women. The former country club matriarch who used to sneer at my work boots and demand absolute perfection from everyone around her was aging at a terrifyingly rapid pace. The harsh prison lighting and the lack of her expensive cosmetic treatments revealed the true ugly face of her toxic soul. She spent her days scrubbing industrial cafeteria trays, her arthritic hands raw and blistered from the cheap chemical cleaners. She had tried to maintain her haughty superiority among the other inmates, demanding respect and attempting to manipulate the prison guards. Her elitist attitude earned her nothing but fierce isolation. The other women despised her. She ate her meals alone, staring blankly at the gray slop on her plastic tray, weeping bitter tears for the lavish lifestyle she threw away just to protect her criminal son. And then there was Rebecca. While she managed to escape federal prison time, her reality was a different kind of suffocating prison. I heard from Jamal that she was currently living in a dingy, roach-infested studio apartment located directly above a noisy dive bar. Without the income of Jamal, or the illicit wealth of Richard, to fund her designer shopping habits, she was forced to face the brutal reality of actual poverty. The massive civil fraud penalties the judge slapped her with meant that 70% of every paycheck she earned went straight to the court-ordered restitution fund. She spent her evenings sitting on a sagging thrift store mattress, counting loose pennies and crumpled dollar bills, just to see if she could afford a box of generic pasta for dinner. She had mocked my floral business, calling me a pathetic charity case. Now she was the one drowning in debt, completely estranged from society, and suffering the miserable consequences of her own arrogant entitlement. They had all destroyed themselves. I did not have to lift a single finger to ruin their lives. I just had to step aside and let the crushing weight of their own greed pull them straight down to the absolute bottom of the ocean. I set the silver watering can down on the mahogany potting bench. I looked around at the towering palms, the vibrant bird of paradise displays, and the massive commercial delivery trucks pulling into my loading docks outside. My employees, strong women who had survived their own personal hells, were laughing and working together in the bright morning sunshine. We were a powerful, unbreakable community. For a long time, I truly thought the ultimate victory would be watching David and Patricia suffer behind bars. I thought I would find deep satisfaction in their endless misery. But as I stood in the warm golden light of my greenhouse, I realized a profound truth. The best revenge is not watching your enemies fall. It is not keeping track of their daily failures or celebrating their pain. The absolute sweetest revenge is waking up one day, looking around at your beautiful, peaceful life, and realizing that your enemies are no longer in your universe at all. They had completely faded into utter irrelevance. They were nothing but a closed chapter in a dark book I would never ever read again. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored green suit. I picked up my clipboard and walked toward the main entrance. A line of eager customers was already forming outside the glass doors, waiting to purchase the beautiful arrangements my team crafted. The morning sun poured through the massive roof, casting golden rays across the floor. I reached the front doors and grabbed the wooden sign hanging in the window. I flipped it around so the bold letters spelling "Open" faced the busy street. I unlocked the deadbolt, pushed the doors wide open, and walked out into the sunlit day, ready to conquer whatever comes next. The true measure of revenge is not found in the destruction of those who wronged you, but in the unstoppable construction of your own peace and independence. Abigail's journey from a discarded, financially abused wife to a powerful CEO proves that your greatest weapon is never just hidden money or secret evidence. It is your unyielding work ethic, your moral compass, and your absolute refusal to let toxic manipulators dictate your worth. When you stop craving the approval of a narcissistic family and start investing entirely in your own growth, you strip them of their power forever. True success heals. Subscribe and share your own story of reclaiming your personal power from toxic relationships in the